Are we at war with Yemen now?
Yes.
Yeah. How would you
Well, I
describe it?
mean, yeah, I guess you wouldn't say it's an all-out war. It's a limited war. It's our Navy against, their missile and drone force. Though I don't think that they're going all out against us. We are, I think, pounding them pretty hard. I mean, we've killed a lot of people. Last I heard, 31. I think almost entirely civilians, and over 100 injured, and a fair amount of destruction.
So why are we at war with Yemen?
Well, the stated reason is the free passage of ships through the Red Sea. The Red Sea, the Suez Canal, of course, is a very important trade route, and the Yemenis, the Houthis, or Ansar Allah, they pretty much shut it down. They shut it down to all Israeli-linked shipping. Not long after the start of the genocidal war against the Gazans. And they when the ceasefire was reached, they stopped. It shows that this is what it was about. But then when the Israelis recently declared and actually implemented a total blockade of all food, of humanitarian aid, then they said they were going to start it up again. Because, look, the Israelis have stated that they're going to basically starving this population. And it seems to me that the Houthis are responding very morally. I've heard them described by Mark Sloboda as the most moral fighting force on the planet. And I think you can make that case. I mean, this is like everyone else's, it's not like that. There are reasons why other countries don't become involved. You can understand that. But in general, the world is just looking the other way and, wringing their hands. But this is the one country that is actually trying to do something about it, because what's happening is horrible. I mean, the Israelis cut off, all food, humanitarian supplies, cut off all the electricity, which means that before there was still a little bit of electricity being supplied from Israel, about 1% of what had preceded October 7th. Much of it was cut off. Much of the electrical distribution system was destroyed during the war. There was also, I think, one power plant that functioned and supplied us, a fair amount of electricity. Not a fair amount, a very small fraction of what originally was supplied within Gaza. But it was enough to keep, for example, a desalination plant running. Again, Gaza has very little in the way of fresh water, and to meet the needs of their population, they have to run this desalination plant. Also a water treatment plant. We're talking about sewage. And now, because these have been shut down, there was fuel that was used to run the one power plant. That's been cut off. The little bit of electricity that was supplied from Israel has been cut off. And so now these plants are being shut down, and Gazans are going thirsty. They're not being fed. They had very limited supplies to begin with, supplies of food, and they're starving. So the Houthis have just declared and have begun to reimpose the blockade, which was very effective. It's quite remarkable. Yemen is a very, very poor country. It's one of the poorest countries on the earth, and it's a country that's been ravaged by war, that was attacked by Saudi Arabia with U.S. support for a period of something like 7 years. It was bombed again and again and again. I don't know the exact number. At least 100,000 civilians were killed during that war, waged by Saudi Arabia. Now we're attacking them, and it's I'm sorry, but this is there's just no way to justify this. Of course, it's being justified in terms of free movement of shipping, but clearly, what is bringing this, what is causing the blockade is this absolutely unjustifiable behavior on the part of the Israelis. And we're the one country that could make them stop. So instead of pressuring the Israelis, say, hey, maybe you should let some food in. Maybe you should let enough electricity in so they can at least have drinking water. Maybe you could do that. Maybe you should stop these war crimes. Instead of saying that, we have decided to launch this campaign against the Houthis in Yemen.
So why couldn't we say, tell Israel to turn on the electricity again, to give them drinking water? Because the agreements of the ceasefire to begin with was to allow humanitarian aid back into Gaza.
Right.
Gaza has everything's been destroyed in Gaza. They have no means of acquiring any aid themselves, right? Everything is relied on. Israel controls all ports of entry in and out, right?
Right, correct.
So they have them completely, in this noose, and they're just tightening it more and more. So why does the U.S. not say, hey, loosen up a little bit, and then this blockade will end in Yemen? Because it's clear that the Houthis have stated why they're doing this. It's in response to what Israel's doing in Gaza right now.
Yeah, well, it's just the same old story. I mean, why did Biden give a blank check to Netanyahu? Why did, throughout his administration, why didn't he ever actually apply the screws and get them to stop the destruction of Gaza? And then we see a continuation. Again, there was the ceasefire, which gave, was a glimmer of hope, but the ceasefire is broken down, and the agreement that had been reached actually was supposed to involve different phases, at least 2 phases, and the first phase has been completed. And we were supposed to go to the second phase, but the Israelis clearly do not want to. Netanyahu has been open about that. He says he doesn't want to do that. So instead, there's this effort that the Americans are taking part in to get Hamas to agree to an extension of the first phase. Look, Hamas is saying, hey, we agreed that we're going to do this, but now you're changing the rules, the terms halfway through here. But again, Hamas is in the weaker position, and they just may agree to it. It's cruel, but I mean, this is the whole story. This is the old story of Zionism and is there an erasure of an entire people, the ethnic cleansing, and now it's, reached genocidal proportions, but we have been kind of gone along for the ride. We've been complicit. That I'm saying, the U.S. government has been complicit in this from the beginning, and they were certainly complicit in the genocide under Biden. And, I'm afraid we have to say that the current administration is too.
So has Yemen done anything prior to the retaliation we'll talk about the USS Harry Truman, but has Yemen attacked American citizens or American vessels or anything like this prior? Was there any provocation that Yemen did directly towards America, or was this all because Israel wants us to do this? Are we doing this because of Israel?
Yeah. It's the latter. It is because of Israel, because of our ties with Israel. There's no question about it. Yeah, there's no, even in Trump's juvenile and fiery, Truth Social post, where he announced that the attack on Yemen was going to begin. He didn't point to any provocation. It was just all about Israel. So even in his own words, it's really about Israel, and again the free passage of ships through the Red Sea. But that is obviously, as the Houthis made crystal clear, that is because of Israel.
With the blockade that the Houthis were imposing on the Red Sea, was this targeting just Israeli and Israeli-linked shipping? Prior to that, other ships were still going through fine, including American vessels?
Well, actually, no, I think it's just like when the Israeli linked was pretty broad. So I think in general, like other supporters of the genocide, which would be the European countries and the U.S., those ships too were targets. Now, there's really not there are not many ships out there that are actually directly owned by the U.S. So I don't know if the Houthis ever directly struck a U.S. ship at some point. But again, that's not what the excuse that or the justification that Trump is providing. It was the end result was that that something like 80 that shipping through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal decreased by 80%. And it's stayed down there. And this is remarkable. Now, Trump's going after them. He says, they're going to have to, there's hell to pay, there's going to be hell in Yemen. But let's not forget that under Biden, there were many, many attacks. There were, it wasn't like that the Navy under the Biden administration didn't try. They did. They were there for a long time and they failed. Now, how can this be? Again, this is a very poor country against what's supposed to be the most powerful military on the planet. And I think that it really comes down to the revolution in technology. Cheap drones can achieve what, can do real damage. A $15,000 drone presents a real threat to a naval vessel. And to defend these naval vessels, to defend themselves, depend on missiles that are multi-million-dollar, and they got to generally, often fire two. They don't always hit their targets. So anyway, it turns out it's something like 1,000 to 1 cost differential in favor of the Houthis. So the Houthis are very poor, but this new technology has really equalized the playing field.
What has the international response been to what's happened? The U.S. strikes on Yemen. Are they been in condemnation? Because the way that Marco Rubio presents it, if you're watching the news, is that we're doing a favor to the whole world. We're restoring international shipping. So how does the whole world look at it? Do they say, thank you, Marco Rubio, for saving global shipping? Or are they saying, what the hell are you guys doing?
I actually don't know. I haven't really seen much of a reaction. I know that the Russians urged the Americans, not in particularly strong terms, but urged the Americans to lay off. But and I'm sure you got similar statements from other governments. Within the Arab world, I think you probably have a lot of the governments that are actually on the side of the U.S. Because they, again, these are not very, these are really corrupt monarchies. And, the lack of shipping is, I think, in general, bad for business. And they have maintained relations with the U.S. and even, indirectly through the U.S. and through other channels with Israel. And so I think you'll find probably very muted response from the governments in the region, but it's different on the street. I think that there's no question about it, that the average Arab is cheering for the Houthis. Even if their governments are not, even if Al Jazeera, the Qatar-based news outlet is also, not on the Houthi side of it. I think it's clear to the man on the street and in the Arab world that the Houthis are the only ones that are really standing up for the Palestinians.
You're saying how Trump said in his Truth Social post how Biden was really weak, and I've heard this sentiment echoed by Pete Hegseth saying this isn't the Biden administration anymore. We are strong. We will hit them hard. They're messing with the wrong guy. So this is scary rhetoric, in my opinion, because there is this emphasis to show that Trump is tough and strong. And picking on the Houthis, for once, they're a very poor country, so it doesn't look good just in itself. But then the fact is, like you're saying, that Biden wasn't really going soft on the Houthis. The U.S. Navy, this operation, what was it, Prosperity Guardian?
Correct.
Yeah. It was just an utter failure, and it wasn't for lack of trying, like we've talked before. They really tried. But like you said, the playing field has been leveled thanks to this new technology. And the Houthis, after what's happened with Saudi Arabia with U.S. backing, they're just used to being bombed, as horrible as that sounds. It doesn't seem like they are scared at all. And we saw that immediately after this big, huge strike that we carried out on Yemen. The Israeli spokesperson and their supreme leader got up and said, okay, now we will attack any American ship. It didn't deter them at all, right? They say attack all American vessels are no longer welcome in the Red Sea, right?
Yeah. They were bombed for 7 years by the Saudis, again, with American support, very, very direct American involvement. And so they have learned to survive, these air attacks. Parts of the part of Yemen that actually where the Houthis are based in, where they have the center of the control is quite mountainous, and they've gone underground. They've figured out how to survive these attacks. And again, they've survived them for years, so it seems very unlikely to me. I guess it's not impossible. Maybe use bunker buster bombs or something that you could actually do some real damage to their underground facilities, but it does not seem likely. I think they're going to survive it, and they're going to be able to maintain this blockade. Again, they don't have to. I think they haven't really succeeded in doing significant damage, as far as we know, anyway. It's to American naval vessels, but they don't have to. But they have damaged a number of shipping vessels, a number of tankers. And they don't have to do a whole lot before the other tankers say, I'm not going through there. It's like if it's a roll of the dice that I'm going to make it through, we're going around the Cape of Good Hope. We're not going to go through the Red Sea. And their insurance companies are telling them the same thing. You want to go through there, you're going to have to pay, pay through the nose. We're quadrupling or quintupling or whatever your insurance rates if you try to go through the Red Sea. So it doesn't take a whole lot for them to maintain that blockade. And I think they probably, you never know in war, but probably they will be able to.
Well, it sounded like to me what the Yemenis were saying were that they were matching this escalation, saying, okay, if they want to fight, then we're ready to fight, that we will be attacking any U.S. naval vessels, parts of the U.S. Navy. Then, so that's different, right? We haven't seen that before from... Is this a serious escalation? Is this something similar like we've seen before with Biden? Or are we at a new stage in this war with Yemen?
Well, there have been attacks on, retaliatory attacks by the Houthis on the U.S. Navy and the U.S. naval fleet there in the Red Sea. And there have been some hits. I don't think there's been serious damage, but there's a question about it. I think that, the U.S. is not eager to advertise if, in that case. So there are rumors that there was some significant damage, but I don't think those rumors were ever confirmed. So we have seen similar events in the past. This may be just on a larger scale. The scale of the attack on Yemen is greater. Maybe the retaliation will be greater too. I guess they did send a number of drones and missiles at the USS Truman. I think that was the one you mentioned. That's what I've heard about. I don't know what the result of that was.
Right. So how dangerous do you think the situation is now?
Well, I think the danger is that it could draw in Iran. Because there have been, first of all, in his Truth Social post, Trump issued a warning to Iran. He said, stop supporting them, or we'll go after you, basically. And then very recently, I think yesterday, I heard that the U.S. was considering striking like Iranian ships. We're not talking about the Iranian Navy, but Iranian ships. Or maybe they will consider the Iranian Navy as well. But ships that are that dock at a Yemeni port. And if that happens, that's it's a direct attack on Iran, and then who knows? Then we have that would be a very, very serious escalation. But the rumors are that such an escalation is being considered right now.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about this whole situation. I think Trump has fallen into a trap here with the Houthis. This is, in my opinion, this is not a winnable war. This is one of those things that will drag on forever. What we've seen with here in the Middle East is you can bomb the crap out of these people. You can massacre, large swaths of their populations, but they will still be standing. And as long as they're standing, then you haven't won, because they are what they say as the axis of resistance. In their mind, to resist is to win. Their objective isn't to go to America and defeat the American army or anything like this. They just have to hold on and survive. And the longer that they hold on and survive, and the more damage that's being inflicted by powers like the United States or Israel, the more damage it does to the United States and Israel. Just on the global scene, people start seeing this and like, whoa, what are you guys are going scorched earth on these populations. And then people start to dive deeper into the root causes of these conflicts, and you go down that rabbit hole, like there's no coming back out. And that's what's happening here. And so I'm really worried that if Trump won't back down, if the Houthis say, they weren't deterred at all by this, and they said, sure, yeah, this is a everyday thing for us, getting bombed by the U.S. or by Israel, we're used to it, or Saudi Arabia, bring it on. And if Trump can't afford to look weak, he'll be vilified so much if he just sort of backs away from Yemen now. I think he's kind of dragged in, I think he's kind of caught. Do you think so? That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, there certainly is that risk. Of course, he might just proclaim victory and then shift the focus elsewhere. It may not be entirely successful, but often the media is very, let's say, collaborates in those efforts of obfuscation. And so, he may find a way to climb down, or again, just shift the focus elsewhere, maybe through another military campaign somewhere else. Everybody will forget about what's happening or what happened in Yemen.
Is there any argument that America could be making that's saying that this is in our national security, that somehow this is, necessary for America, that we're defending America?
Yeah. Well, you can.
On the opposite side of the world. That's right. The thing. If you look at it, it's just like...
Yeah, well, it does affect American shipping. I mean, the effect on the U.S. and the U.S. economy is pretty minor. It's, it's much greater for Israel and for Europe. They're obviously much more dependent on that particular trade route. But there is some influence there. So, I mean, if it was just, purely a question of shipping, then you'd have some kind of argument. Yeah, the problem is that, again, you can't just isolate it. This was not just an unprovoked attack. You have to understand what the motivation was. And the motivation is very clear. And it's not just a matter of words, but it's been demonstrated by actions by the Houthis. It started after October 7th. It stopped with the ceasefire. Work on the ceasefire. That would be which you should be doing anyway. You should be holding Israeli feet to the fire and say, hey, we agreed to the second phase. Hey, cut it out. These are, not only is this cutoff of humanitarian aid and electricity, not only is that a breach of the ceasefire, a very major breach or breaches of the ceasefire, these are also war crimes. You're obligated under international law as the occupying power to make sure that they have, the necessities for life. So there's just no question we should be doing that regardless. It's our failure, our failure to pressure the Israelis to ensure that the ceasefire goes forward that is causing this war. And it's something that we could correct, but we won't.
So if we won't correct, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for America, Israel, the world?
Yeah. Well, again, there is this risk, of course, that this conflict will spread, that they'll be out of frustration because, let's say, the Houthis continue to fire missiles, continue to maintain the blockade. We'll start striking Iranian vessels, and that could have huge consequences.
It just feels like that's the path we're on, and This was something that we were always concerned about, that this was always simmering in the background. And this attack on Yemen caught me by surprise. I didn't see it coming. Did you? Was this a surprise to you?
It's not that big a surprise. Again, it's just yeah. I know that there are certain things that Trump has done and has said that gives us some cause for hope in the Middle East. But all in all, you look at his record, and all in all, you look at his rhetoric. It's violently, Zionist. It's really, you could almost describe it as extremist. Something that's very much in line with the extreme wing of Israeli politics. So, no, I'm not surprised.
Is this conflict that we're engaged in with Yemen, do you see it just kind of simmering, small tit for tat, or do you see that the U.S. will try to strike real hard and then Yemen will go all out? And if they sink one of our naval vessels, that's a huge event,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering that the damage that will do to the Trump presidency, and his reaction to it, because the sign of being a strong man.
Yeah.
And just the whole America First movement, the idea of no war, peace. I think it's just going to all go out the window. Everything's just going to fall apart, and then we could be embroiled in a huge conflict. And
No, it's always a danger. That's right. I don't know if the Houthis actually have the ability to sink a U.S. naval vessel. I think that may be very difficult for them. Clearly they can inflict some damage and, inflict sufficient damage on the commercial vessels, sufficient to maintain the blockade. There was some talk about the possibility that Russia would supply them with ship-killing missiles. And I don't know. It is interesting. I think that one of the first phone calls that Rubio made was to Russia at the start of this, and I was maybe he was trying to urge them or warn them against doing that. We can only guess.
Do you think Russia would get involved if this starts to escalate?
I think they would be quite reluctant. They're they obviously don't support us, and they're not supporters of Israel, but they do have to look after their own national interests. First, they're engaged in an existential struggle themselves, and so I think they would be reluctant to take on new burdens and to endanger what looks like maybe an improvement in relations between them and the U.S. Doesn't mean that they're going to do the U.S.'s bidding. I think it's clear that they're not. And if the U.S. tries to bend their arm to make them do something that they don't want to do, they're going to firmly reject any such effort on the part of the U.S. But I think they would be very reluctant to, let's say, escalate in other parts of the world. I think that was something they were considering. At least that's what the rumors were back in the Biden days, because of course Biden kept on escalating, and the Russians countered by, at least this is what the rumors say, by threatening to supply these ship-killing missiles to Yemen. But the whole dynamic has changed, or at least at present. We'll see what happens if we go down the road. If again, we're getting very mixed signals from the U.S. government vis-a-vis Russia. There's some escalatory talk, and there's been some action. We have to, again, the imposition of new trade sanctions, and the introduction of a new weapon on the battlefield. But then, of course, there have been positive signs and real steps too. So it's a very mixed bag right now. But if the Trump administration ends up, kind of just reverting to the battle Biden ways, I think that the Russians would not be reluctant to do something like that. They may decide that, okay, it's impossible to talk to the Americans. We just have to counter-escalate. And they could do that through the Houthis. But I think it's very doubtful that they would do it now.
Yeah. Maybe I'm overreacting to this conflict with the Houthis, but I feel like this is a catalyst of something really bad that
It
can
could
really
be.
bring down, the U.S. the U.S. U.S. military, the Trump presidency, the whole idea of no more wars. It's just, I just don't think that this conflict is winnable for the United States. Do you?
I don't think so. I mean, again, it was the Biden administration really tried. There's always this talk about Trump does this, you know, not just with respect to the Middle East, but also with respect to Russia. He claimed that it was like he's so tough that the Russians would never have tried, invading Ukraine if he had been president back then, and that he would have flooded Ukraine with weapons. But of course, the Biden administration did flood Ukraine with weapons. There's really nothing else to give. So I I don't think there really is much room for, you can't really turn up the heat in any significant way. Again, you can kill more civilians, unfortunately, just like the Israelis have in Gaza and Lebanon. It's easy to kill civilians. And if that's what you want to do, just to show that you're tough, you can do it. But to destroy the facilities where the missiles are made and housed and the installations from which they're fired, I think that's a much more difficult task, and it may very well be impossible.
Right. Do you think that the strategy for the Houthis is just to drain the United States economically? We've already talked about the shortage of air defense missiles. I imagine a lot of these ballistic missiles that were intercepted were from like F-16, F-35 Sidewinder missiles. There's also the SM-3s from the boats themselves. And you're saying, these drones that are fired or these missiles, they're cheap. The drones could be the cost of a lawnmower, and we fire a $3 million missile at it. So is that, do you think, the strategy that they're just going to be like, we'll just, if we do this war of attrition, how much we've been greatly attrited thanks to Ukraine, and now, we'll be even more attrited thanks to our involvement in the Middle East, right?
Yeah, well, I'm sure that enters into their calculations. I don't think it's the motivation. Again, it's clear. They've made it clear, and their behavior shows that they mean what they say. It's about Gaza, and so that is the main motivation. But I'm sure that they're taking those factors into account. They're considering, they are aware of the expense and the limited quantities of these U.S. missiles. I don't think they have some sort of production capability. It's hard to believe that they have a very significant capability. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think they have been getting help from Iran. I think there's no question about it. And that may be the reason that there are these threats against Iranian vessels.